Hi everyone, welcome to the Commonwealth Writers Panel. My name is Jessica. I'm the social media manager of the Himalayan Writing Retreat, the organization that is hosting this panel discussion. Before we begin, I'd just like to tell you about the First Draft Club. It's a month-long online writing community that we host every other month. It's a great initiative because all the donations that we receive in this writing community, we help the Chirag School with it. It's an NGO-run school here in rural Himalayas in Uttarakhand. You get a word count tracker, you're added to a WhatsApp group of 100 plus writers, and basically everyone eggs each other on to write more and meet your writing goals. And we have literary experts who come in and talk to us every Sunday evening, and this starts this Sunday. So registrations are open for 2 days more. So check it out. I am putting the link here in the chat for everyone to see. So yeah, hope you like it. And over to you, Vidhan. Let's begin.
Thank you, Jessica. And thank you, audience, for taking the time out on a Friday evening for this discussion. I am sure with the two lovely ladies I'm talking to today, we'll make it quite engaging and we will make it worth your time today. So let me just ask by asking each of us, the participants today, to introduce ourselves. So in no particular order, Kritika, you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Excited to be on this panel today. My name is Kritika. I'm from Ranchi, Jharkhand, and I'm a writer.
Thank you, Kritika. And Sanjana, you want to go next, please?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to talk. I'm so excited that all of you are here. I'm also a writer. I'm from Mumbai, India, but I'm in Austin in the US right now.
Thank you, Sanjana. And last but not the least, actually the least, my name is Vidhan Verma, and I'm going to be talking to Sanjana and Kritika today. I grew up in small town India, and that is where most of my stories were born. I live in Bangalore with my wife and my daughter. So before we start, I think I want to narrate a coincidence that somebody pointed out. Last year, I got shortlisted in Commonwealth Short Story Prize. The story was called Groom like Shahrukh. And this year, Sanjana's Aishwarya Rai won. In Sanjana's story, Aishwarya Rai does make an appearance. In mine, there was only a reference to King Khan. So one question that somebody asked me is Bollywood the trick to getting a CWP shortlist and actually winning? I really want to say yes. But if I had known then I would have bought Shahrukh for a cameo in my story as well. But I leave the shots, that for the later part of the discussion. But I want to come to Sanjana's story, and what a vivid story it is. I could not get it out of my head days after I had read it. And so Sanjana, let me begin by talking to you, asking you what this story was about. How did you imagine a story like this in the first place? How long did you take to write it? The works of how many times did you edit it? And so on, yeah. So
Well,
if you can guide us.
Thank you. I'm glad the story resonated. I think the story started with this thought in my head about a store for mothers where you could go and buy mothers off the shelf based on how they look, based on what features they have. And then obviously that idea shifted and evolved into what it is now, a shelter for mothers. It was born mostly out of frustration. I just finished an MFA program, and so for 3 years I was writing stories and fiction workshops. And this was my second year of the program, and I became frustrated with myself that I was only writing about mothers and daughters. And I kind of wondered if I could ever write anything else, anything that wasn't a mother and daughter story. And so I thought, okay, let me take the story, let me pack in as many mothers as possible into one story, and maybe after that I could move on to something else. The moving on didn't happen. I still write about mothers and daughters, but that story I think ended up being a really fun way to imagine the different iterations of what that relationship can look like. I think I wrote 6 drafts for that story, but it didn't change very much from draft 1 to draft 6. A few tweaks, a few shifts in where I was giving people information, a little bit of expanding on the different mothers, but that's it.
Wow. If that is how I would have written mothers and daughters, I would have stuck to my guns here. But thank you for that, Sanjana. And coming to you, Kritika, if we were talking about a formula to win Commonwealth Prize or another short story prizes, you have made the CWP shortlist 3 times, and you eventually went to win on the prize. You were also a pushcart nominee amongst all the other things that I'm not going to convey here. But if there was a formula to winning these, clearly you have it. So talk to us about your process of writing a short story, and also about selecting a story for an entry.
I don't have a formula, obviously, but I do look for a sense of wholeness in a story. I do think what makes a story good or great is entirely subjective. But I like to read stories that both invite and resist interpretation. So by the end of a story, if you cannot stop thinking about it and yet you don't really get it, that is a great sort of balance and a great place for me to be at. Um, I write a lot about, I've noticed, not that I'm conscious, but I write a lot about death. That's a very recurrent theme in my work. I find it difficult not to think about it and consequently not to write about it. I also inevitably write a lot about the female experience, even though I don't think I'm having a female experience all the time. I think my goal in sort of my vision for my fiction is to create female characters who are really kind of inhabiting a human sensibility, and you're able to read them without constantly having to remember that they are women. So yeah, I'm trying to create female characters who are human beings with complexities. But yeah, I mean, that and the fact that I mean, some of my best short story writers are Russian writers, actually. So I swear by the works of Chekhov and Gogol, and just the kinds of sensibilities like that they try to communicate, especially absurdity. That's an important one for me. A sense of absurdity, a sense of like people taking themselves really seriously in a world that takes itself really seriously, but everything is sort of pointless in the end, in a poignant and beautiful way. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, but I would like, again, your stories do get poignant and beautiful. I can point to multiple ones that are there, but obviously, the ones that won are in themselves a work of art. So I'm guessing you have achieved what you wanted, held out to achieve here. Thank you for that, Kritika. So Sanjana, we talked about how you have created the story. Can you also talk about how you worked upon your submission for the stories? How did you select? Maybe you have different mothers, as you talked about in this story, but you have other stories where you talk about mothers and daughters. How did you select this story for the submission? And did you write this story particularly with a goal of a prize in mind or a submission in mind? Uh, or you know uh, this was the second year. I remember you mentioned somewhere that you were for the award. So were the submissions in two years different? And did you know that this is a in some ways a good enough story to win a prize?
I had no sense that it would actually win when I submitted it. I think with any kind of writing competition, Of course, a lot of it is about how good your story is, but so many people have good stories. And so I think it's just this combination of writing good story, the judges' sensibilities, a little bit of luck. So I had no clue that it would win. I had no clue that I had no clue that it would be shortlisted even. And I didn't write it specifically for the competition. I wrote it for an MFA workshop that I was doing in my second year. And I had to turn in 3 stories that semester, and this was the first story I wrote for that workshop. Uh, I I think I chose it out of all of the stories I'd written at that point because the Commonwealth Prize feels like a prize that is about place and context and being rooted in something, for better or for worse. And this was a story of mine that felt polished enough to submit and also felt like it catered to that desire for context and that desire for writing from somewhere. And then beyond that, in a more practical sense, it fit the word limit. So a combination of those factors, I think, led me to submitting that. I have submitted to the prize before, twice, not just once, but both of those times were when I was in my undergrad, I think in like 2016 and 2017. So several years ago now, and I don't remember what I submitted, and I'm sure it was not very good. Uh, and this year, and this submitting to this year was really just because a friend reminded me about the prize and told me the deadline was coming up and said, you should send something in. And so I did.
Uh, and you did submit a really awesome work from that. So I kind of get where you're coming from, the Sanjana, because when I was submitting my story a year ago, that was not my first choice. But it was more a technical choice because it fit the word limit, and because you had to submit something that you thought you don't want to, if you don't submit, you don't win, as simple as that. So
Yeah.
my submission was not the first choice, but I went ahead with the submission and things happened. So I totally get what you're talking about. uh, while I was preparing for this conversation, what I also realized is how similar or how familiar both you, Kritika and Sanjana, are in your works in certain ways. Both of you talk about familiarity and empathy. Both of you in your talks have talked about where you have come from, and even in the introduction today. Um, Sanjana, your story, Aishwarya Rai, is definitely clearly based in Mumbai. You've made those references. Uh, Kritika, I read your work, The Goddess Who Wants Out, and I could relate, see a smaller city like Ranchi. Ranchi is not really a really small city, but yeah, I could see how the story could have been born there. So talk to us, would request both of you to talk about your own experience in writing. What has shaped your, how has those shaped your experience, and how does familiarity and empathy play a role in your writing here? I'll let any of you go first.
Go for it, Sanjana.
All right, I'll go for it. I have to also say that I read Kritika's story. I reread it this week for this, but I initially read it in 2020 when I was researching MFAs to apply to, and I was looking into UMass Amherst, and she came up as a student, and I read her work then, and so I feel like this is a very full circle moment to come to, and I loved it even then. So this is really exciting. I think that for me, writing complex characters who are good characters, and I make a distinction between good characters and good people. I think good characters are not necessarily moral in the way that good people should be. But I think writing good characters requires a degree of empathy, especially if they're not moral characters. So I try to always have empathy for the people that I'm writing in my stories. And then I think in terms of distance and familiarity, I think about that a lot as I write stories that are set in India because I'm so far away. So I'm pretty distant from from the country for most of the year. And I feel like that sense of distance allows me to access something that I can't access when I'm actually in the space. When I'm actually in that context, it's really hard for me to write about it. So that's how I think about distance and familiarity in those terms. There's like a refamiliarization process I go through with the city when I write, and then when I visit, and then when I write, I'm thinking about the visit. I'm thinking about the city of my memories. I'm acknowledging that the city is different than how it exists in my memories, and so I'm trying to put it on the page, and I'm falling short every time, of course, but it's that effort to know it better, to have it exist in my work that I think, yeah. Does that answer the question?
It does, and you know, I, I, I remember. I think it was you who mentioned that Unaccustomed Earth remains one of your favorite books. It remains mine as well, and the whole concept of putting a distance between yourself and the place that you write about. The Jhumpa Larry touches about it in certain ways, and yet she has a very different connotation of it. So, um, it's an interesting point that you make there. Kritika, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I've been writing for more than a decade now. And I always have a strong sense of place in my stories. But now I think, now that I'm working on a longer piece, the longest thing that I've ever attempted to write, I think my relationship with that sense of place I have in my writing has become a little bit nuanced. And I have come to accept the fact that I actually feel out of place everywhere all the time. That's just my condition. And so I didn't really feel at home in Ranchi. There was always this sense of like wanting to get out of there, get out of the house, get out of the city, because there is something claustrophobic about being a woman in a small Indian city. There is something oppressive about it. And you think, oh, if you could just get out of there, you would be free. But obviously, everywhere you go, you have identity markers that you're carrying around. I'm a woman of color. As soon as I got to UMass Amherst, to my MFA program, like people came up to me and they hugged me and they were like, oh, you're a woman of color. And I was like, what? I'm a woman of color? So I became a woman of color. And so I think I've just come to accept the fact that I'm always feeling just a little bit out of place everywhere. And my relationship with Ranchi is so intricate and old and beautiful that I cannot not write about it. I'm always thinking about it. I'm always missing it. And as soon as I go back there, 2 weeks later, I'm just like, oh my God, I'm not gonna go back in like a year. And then 6 months later, I'm looking up tickets. So I have a love-hate relationship with Jharkhand, but also like India in general. And generally, I'm generally a sort of a restless person and constantly need to get away. So I feel like now more and more my works have this sense of like trying to escape, but you can't go far enough. I've realized you just can't get farther enough from wherever it is that you think you're from. My partner, he's from Chile, and Chile is the farthest country on the planet from India. So if I wanted to go any farther, I'd have to leave the planet. And even Chile doesn't feel like it's far enough. And so now I think that's my relationship with place is just trying to figure out how to get away while making peace with the fact that I probably never will.
It's a very interesting perspective. It's almost like you're tethered to the place, and yet you want to keep a distance between yourself and the place, and that clearly works for both of you. So, I think if you to write about distant locations, then write about familiarity in that sense. Thank you for that, Sanjana, Kritika. Moving those conversations forward, I think there are a lot of people who are aspiring writers in this group. We have very sizable number of people attending this. So talk to us about how, we always talk about priorities and writing together. So, again, um, Sanjana, you're finishing a grad school. Of course, you write as a part of it, but you write beyond it as well. And Kritika, you have taken up writing, and you talk about how you go to cleaning your house when you have a writer's block. And I found it really, really interesting. You're not writing when you have writer's block, which is what uh, I try to do, sit on a desk and try for that, my muse, my inspiration to come in. So what is the process of writing for both of you? Do you write at a particular time? Do you write at write at wherever the inspiration strikes? How has the process been for either of you? Kritika, you want to go first?
Yeah, okay. I don't clean my house the way I used to 4 years ago. Don't have the same relationship with the cleaning. But yeah, I mean, now, these days, when I have a writer's block, I just want to read something really, 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 really good. Or just go for a very long walk into the woods or somewhere, or on the streets. I live in London. It's a very, very exciting city. So many stories everywhere. So those types of things. Um, my process, I spend a lot of time alone, and if I don't, then it becomes difficult to write. So being by myself, having like noise cancellation headphones on, and yeah, start in the morning, first thing in the morning after my morning coffee, and I'll just write the whole day. uh, Probably take a nap in between and break for like food and stuff. Yeah, and that's it. And sometimes it becomes inconvenient with this whole inspiration thing. The inspiration will strike in the middle of the night or when you have to go to bed, and then you have to get up and make a note, and it's inconvenient. It happens a lot. Some nights I'll go to bed and I just can't fall asleep for like 2 hours because like stuff comes up in your head, and then you have to make a note. And sometimes I'll just fall asleep telling myself I'll remember this the next morning, and mostly I do. But yeah, lots of note making. And I recently came across an article about how Virginia Woolf used to make lots of notes, and I still have to read it, but I have an intimidating amount of notes now. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I can relate to that. I have WhatsApp groups and then groups of groups because you want to note down something specifically on that. And no, these are groups with myself. So just to take a quick note of something there. But I am not so lucky with remembering things in the morning. So if I remember something, I have to note it down now. It is lost forever. Thank you for that, Kritika. Sanjana, what is your process of writing?
Yeah, I have to say I admire people who can write in the morning and people who can write every day. I'm much more chaotic than that. I think part of my MFA process over the last 3 years has been accepting that writing every day doesn't work for me, and I don't tend to do that. I'm very much I've only ever written short stories. I've never written anything longer form. And when it comes to short stories, I'm very much I want to sit and I want to get a full draft out at one time. So because I think like with every story, you're engaging with a different aspect of voice, and it's difficult to re-enter that headspace and that voice midway through a story if you, I think, let it sit, for me at least. And because I've been writing for deadlines the last 3 years, workshop deadlines, I tend to just pull a couple all-nighters 2 days before the deadline, stay up in my living room, just typing and finish the story. Now that I've graduated, I have to figure out how to sort of replicate that deadline motivated writing process. And I haven't quite figured it out yet. I think it's gonna be me relying on friends to set deadlines for me, and have consequences if I don't write, because I'm very motivated by the pressure of a deadline. So yeah, my writing process is I write to deadlines and I try and get a full draft out in one go. And then in terms of writer's block, I agree with Kritika. A long walk can be magical. I think also just switching things up from what you were trying before. So if I'd been trying to write on my laptop, I'll switch and try writing by hand in a notebook instead. I'll move locations. If I'm sitting at my desk, I might move downstairs to my living room. I might move to my bed. So I think, yeah, switching up where you are and switching up your mode of writing can help kind of shake you out of writer's block. But again, the thing that most shakes me out of writer's block is an urgent deadline.
I R&D deadlines are a beautiful thing. I don't know why people do not like them. I like them as much as them because they make magical work happen. Scott Adams talks about in his books, he talks about creating a system so you don't have a deadline per se, but you're doing something every day, and that's something that I try to do. Not very successful at it so far. Um, I am trying to write a bigger piece myself, like both of you have mentioned. So uh, that requires a different kind of energy, a different kind of goal, and I, I'm coming through a lean period on writing myself. So I've signed up for the HWR, the FDC program, as they call it, First Draft Club, so that I can get some writing done. And I'll go on record to say I'm not getting paid to say this, so it's something that I'm experimenting with. Okay, so moving on, Kritika, you obviously have created, traveled some distance since your Commonwealth Prize win. You also talk about, you also teach a course now for writing and uh, so talk to us about how, now that you're off by some distance, how has that program affected you, helped you, not helped you, winning when I say program, I mean to say the Commonwealth Prize win. How has that helped you, affected you in over the several years here?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it definitely gave me a lot of confidence and gave me other kind of very much needed logistical things like an agent um, who is waiting for me to finish my work at night. So I'm very grateful that those types of things are possible for me, and I can just sort of focus on my writing and don't really have to do much else. Um, but I do think that my sort of relationship with my identity as a writer has changed, and I feel less comfortable being considered a Commonwealth writer or a woman writer or a woman of color writer, just one year writer. And I was having a conversation, I remember in 2020 with Janice Pariat. She was like, "Oh, congratulations, you won the Commonwealth Short Story Prize. Do you think that there's a pressure that people from the Commonwealth feel to sort of represent the Commonwealth and just talk about stuff that happens in our countries and cities, etc.?" Because Janice comes from the Northeast and she doesn't really want to talk about the conflict. Like, she has a very original and brilliant mind. And so I don't think I fully understood that question at the time, but the more I continued writing, I realized it is true. And post-colonial theory, which I had a lot of respect for, um, 5 years ago, I think is a bit of a detriment to creativity. It doesn't allow you to free up your mind, and so I think I tell myself that I got it out of the way. I wrote my Jharkhand story, and I will still continue to write from a very very self-consciously sort of Indian place, but that's not enough for me anymore. I want to do more than that. I want to talk about the human condition, and I want everyone in the world who can read and wants to read to be able to find it relatable, and not just because it speaks about a very specific situation unfolding in a specific part of the world, but because it really just speaks to the human condition, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's been a bit of a change.
No, and I can, I'm looking forward to reading your next work from the perspective. We'll talk more about it through the conversation. Um, so, you know, continuing with this theme of winning the Commonwealth Prize, uh, you know, what advice do you give to writers who are aspiring for prizes? The prizes are an important validation. At the end of the day, I think all three of us will acknowledge that being shortlisted or winning in either of your cases uh, has been in several ways beneficial. For what Kritika you talked about the technical reasons for it, but I think they go beyond it as well. Um, what advice would you give to aspiring writers who are trying to see their work shine uh, through a border elsewhere? Um,
Sanjana, do you want to go first, or should I? What do you?
Sure, I can go. I think you're right that a prize like this is incredible validation, right? And I'm already feeling so grateful and lucky to have seen such a wonderful response from people who've connected with my story. I've had agents reach out to me, so I think it absolutely can be very life-changing, and I'm really grateful. I also think though that, like I was saying earlier, I don't think there's a formula or a strategy that can guarantee you win a prize. I think you can write a good story and you can send it in and you can hope the judges see it and you can hope that you get lucky that day. I think it's a combination of a great story, judges who respond to your work, and then being lucky that day. And so I think it's important to put your work out there and to give yourself chances at this, to give yourself a shot. I also think though it's important to be able to um build your own sense of self as a writer without being reliant on validation like this, because I don't think you can guarantee that you'll get exactly that. So I think it's important that you figure out how to be confident in yourself as a writer, and I think a lot of that comes from having community to boost you when you need to, having people you can turn to. That could be an MFA program, that could be just close friends that you share your work with, that could be family, it could be old teachers. So I think having a community who can give you that sense of validation and confidence as a writer is really, really useful, I will say.
No, thank you. And I completely relate to the community thing. I think you cannot be productive on all days, and sometimes the community helps you move ahead in lean times, if you will. So yes, absolutely agree with that. Yeah. Kritika, what's your take on this?
So like just sort of things that might help new writers get better at what they do, right? I think read a lot, and set really high standards for yourself. Practice a lot. Anything that you see out there that looks good, feels relatable when you read it, has come out of a lot of practice, a lot of editing. So that's really important. And of course, like you don't have to be somebody who writes every day, but being consistent in whatever way you can is very, very important. And developing a certain relationship with language that's unique, that feels like, oh, now what's happening, this is my own, this is coming from somewhere inside of me, right? This is what I write like, and if you were to read my body of work, you could tell, oh, this is written by me, right? So having that sense of what makes your work your own, and it's not just at the aesthetic sort of level of language, like syntax and sentence ability. So about what is it try to capture, what types of sensibilities you admire in the works of the writers that you like. That's humor, some of us like gothic. What do you like, right? Having an idea so that you can actually whittle down your list of great writers and then be more focused and sort of refined in your tastes. Other than that, paying attention to what happens to you inside of you when you're reading a good story and you feel moved by it, because that's the kind of response you're trying to evoke in your readers. So when you read something and it moves you, what does that mean? Try to figure that out. You don't have to have the words for it, but like paying attention to that feeling and holding on to that feeling. And when you write something, try your best to step out of your shoes and read it very objectively and see if you're evoking a similar feeling. If you are writing and feeling bored over what you're writing, your reader will most certainly be bored too. So, having that sort of a dual relationship with writing where you're also simultaneously reading your writing as if you weren't reading it, as if it was someone else. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Makes sense. Jessica is reminding me that we have time for only one last question, so I'll make it really short. But I have enjoyed this conversation, and I'm looking forward to all the questions that have come into the chat as well. So, Sanjana, Kritika, what do we expect from you? Kritika, you have alluded to something you're writing, a bigger piece. You want to talk about it, and Sanjana, you want to talk about it as well?
I mean, I'm writing a novel, but there's not much to talk about because I'm so in the middle of everything that it's just hard to be objective and describe it. But it is a novel.
Okay, we look forward to it, and all the best for it.
Thank you.
Sanjana, what are you working on?
Well, I just graduated, and so I just finished my MFA thesis, which is a collection of short stories. So at the moment, I'm just working on polishing those stories up in preparation to send out to agents and submit to more journals and hopefully get more work out there.
All the best for it, and if they are as good as the one that we have already read, I'm so looking forward to reading them. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So we will dig right into the number of questions that come in. Jessica, help me sort them through.
Sure. Yes.
I think the first question is, how do we choose the title for stories? And we have very, very interesting titles, Great Indian Tea and Snakes. How did you come up with that, Kritika? And, Sanjana, you want to talk about how you got Aishwarya Rai? It was kind of, I could see why you chose that, but you want to talk about your process as well?
Yeah, do you want to start, Kritika? Your title is
Or
a better
maybe we'll take
than
one
mine.
question so that we can get different perspectives. Kritika, you talk about Great Indian Tea and Snakes and the titles, and I'll get that next one to Sanjana.
Well, I mean, Snakes I'd read actually somewhere. Snakes you read sort of very often, in small town India. Tea I came up with tea because I needed it to mean something, but not TEA, just for the sort of the comic effect. And yeah, and the Great Indian was also it sounds great. I needed it to sound great. The owners of the tea stall needed it to sound great. So I love that. I mean, I remember driving past a dhaba one time. I was coming back from Fiji because I'm an engineer. So I went to Fiji for coaching, and I was returning home one night, and I saw a dhaba which said Hotel Jharkhand, but it was a dhaba. It was not a hotel, but it's called Hotel Jharkhand. And a little boy was washing dishes outside. And I was coming back at 8 p.m. after studying physics, chemistry, math, and I was going to go on and get a job and all of that sort of thing. And this little boy was washing dishes. This really moved me. And so that image stuck in my head. And this is actually the inspiration for the name as well as
Very
the
interesting.
story.
Sanjana, I'll take the next question pass the next question to you. How do you edit and revise drafts?
My edit process is after I get a first draft out, I just let it sit for a bit. After I get a first draft out and get feedback from people, I don't revise right away. I give it a couple months because I think to have an effective revision of a work, you need some distance from it. You can't be too in the middle of it. So I hear feedback from my friends or my peers or whatever it is, and then I kind of just leave it alone for a month, 2 months until I feel like returning to it. And then I think my editing process is I have my draft open on half of my laptop screen, and then I have a blank Word doc open on the other half. I think I never edit on the document itself. I don't think that lends itself to making good changes, substantive changes to your work. So even if I'm only trying to make small changes, even if I'm only trying to make copy edit changes, I prefer to just rewrite the work from scratch on a new document because you don't know what you might discover as you're rewriting it. You don't know where that might take you. So yeah, my editing process is to have some distance from the work and then to rewrite it.
All right. Thank you for that. And I was just scanning through the questions while you're talking. So there are a couple of questions who who want to know what would you recommend reading, and maybe a couple of you can pick a couple of stories and maybe talk about one of them that you would really enjoy it. So we know what makes a good short story in your opinion. Yeah.
I would recommend. Sorry, you want to go ahead?
No, go for it.
No, I mean just one story. If I could recommend one story, it would be The Overcoat by Gogol. It's my favorite short story. It's got everything that I look for in a short story. And I'm not going to give away spoilers, but if you can read it and then reread it like 5 or 10 more times, that would be a wonderful start.
you want to talk about why, you don't go with the story, but why is it such a great story?
Well, it's extremely absurd. It is realist. I mean, it starts off as a realist story and then it becomes extremely weird and strange. And you still believe everything that's happening. You also see how ahead of his time he was. And it's the setting for Gogol. Every story he's ever written, the setting is the human brain. That's the setting. And that's what I admire most about his work, is that that's where it's all taking place. It's about madness. So I love it. I think there's a little bit of madness in all good stories.
Indeed, there is. Sanjana, what is your story? What is your stories that you would pick up?
Hard to narrow it down, but I think I have two that I go back to frequently. One of those is A Temporary Matter by Jhumpa Lahiri. I think that to me really is a perfect short story. The work that she does in those pages is stunning. I read that in my undergrad and I've come back to it every year, I think, since. It gives you a good sense of how much work you can do in a limited space, not just in the limited page count of a short story, but also in a limited physical space for your characters. How much emotional work can happen in one room or like one small house. I think it's just gorgeous. And then the other story that I come back to frequently, and both of these are stories that I teach when I teach my undergrad fiction workshops, because I think they do a good job of demonstrating just a strong, good short story. So the second one is called Snakes, and it's by Danielle Evans. It's from her collection Before You Suffocate Your Own Fool Self. And I think that story is so strong in terms of structure. That's a story I look to when I'm thinking about how to structure a story. I read that and I marvel at how she structured that story so perfectly. So those are two stories that I like to teach and that I like to come back to when I'm writing. There's a lot of other story collections that I can recommend. Maybe I'll put them in the chat so we can move on to another question.
Please do if you can. That I'm sure a lot of people are waiting for those. I'm going to combine two questions, or maybe I'll read the question as it is. How do you approach US UK literary agents, cold emails or warm introductions? Is it harder to do so as a writer based in India? Kritika, you want to take it first?
I never approached an agent, but I can speak about just the general literary scene. I've had conversations with several agents sort of before figuring out who I want agent to be. There's a little bit of racism involved in this whole process. The East Coast literary scene is a little is racist, actually. It expects the first and the most sort of primary expectation they have of an Indian writer is to write about your culture.
Kritika, you're frozen. Kritika, okay, Sanjana, yeah, Kritika, you're back. Oh, all right.
Okay.
Could you please repeat?
Saying that, yeah, I was just saying that the East Coast literary scene is racist. It's not a very progressive space, and just the publishing industry in general is quite.
I think Kritika froze again for me.
Yeah.
So maybe we can. Okay, Kritika, are you back now?
Oh no! How much have I said that's actually come through?
It has come in bits and pieces.
Okay, so I'll just say the East Coast literary sort of publishing industry and the literary scene in general is not as progressive as they think they are, and there's a fair bit of racism involved in this kinds of expectations they have of writers like me. And so if you're trying to get your foot in the door, you will have to negotiate with those types of expectations. You'll have to be aware of what is it that white publishing industry expects out of you, and then change the game by sort of being inside of it. You can't not play the game. That's the unfortunate truth.
I get it, and I'm going to segue into the next question, which is similar but a little different. Can you also speak about submitting to American literary magazines and how difficult or easy it is to get acceptance and the works here.
Sanjana, me or Sanjana?
I think you can go there because you already you've talked about it, so we can go and I can park the next one for Sanjana.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same, honestly. They do expect a certain kind of stories to come out of you. And the difference between the United States publishing industry and the UK is that the UK is trying to assuage a different kind of guilt. The US doesn't look at Indian writers as people they owe anything. And so because it's so steeped in identity politics, um, it's sort of harder for you to be published in the US unless you are saying something that actually are the same things that they are fetishizing about India and the global South. So Islamophobia, for instance, is something that they understand in the US because they practice it. But there's lots of other things that we are familiar with in India and the global South landscape that makes no sense to them. And so you will have to do a bit of, again, negotiation in trying to reach them. And therefore, I think it's important to just make your stories more sort of universally about being a complicated human being more than anything else. But yeah, I want to hear what Sanjana has to say about this too.
Yeah, I think my experience with submitting, I agree that I loved what you said about how the countries are trying to assuage different types of guilt. I definitely push back on the feeling of, oh, I have to write Indian stories and I have to write stories about like a specific trauma. I steer away from that. I think my advice when it comes to submitting is to wait, honestly. Until you feel really ready. This was advice my undergraduate writing advisor gave me, was to not be in a rush to submit, not be in a rush to get your work out there. Give yourself time to be a better writer. Give yourself time to build up a body of work. Give yourself time to build up your voice. And then at some point you'll know that you're ready to start having work out there. I think if you do that, you allow yourself to sort of bypass some of the really, brutal rejections. That's not to say I still get rejections. I'm still getting rejections, but I think I'm also getting rejections peppered in by acceptances. And I'm also getting rejections that are, the nice rejections where they tell you that they're not going to publish this story, but they like your writing and you should submit again. So I think just giving yourself time to write and be a good writer before you start putting your work out there allows you to not have to go through that acute sense of, oh my God, I'm only getting rejections. This is so hard. I'm not a good writer.
No, thank you for that, and I think that's a sage advice in several ways. And I could see why somebody would give it, and yet we also hear that go put the work out there. So I think it's a fine line and for different for each of us in several ways that we see it. So Sanjana, I think the next question also is in several ways an extension of what we have talked about. How do working professionals and who are part-time writers balance their reading and writing commitments, and how do you get picky about the reading material? And I see that you already put a lot of recommendations there, but so how do you get picky about the reading materials that will actually hone your craft in the long run? So I think it's a very interesting question. I think I'll request both of you to have a dig at it.
Yeah, I might not be the best person to talk about how to balance writing life with full-time life. I'm looking for a job right now, but I went straight from my undergrad to my MFA, and so I haven't had that. I haven't had to negotiate that yet. I will have to in the near future. So maybe I'll leave that for Kritika. But in terms of how you're choosing what to read, I think that just based on my own preferences and the things I write about and the things I want to read about, I read a lot of speculative fiction and I read a lot of short fiction by women of color. I think that when you find work, when you can identify the kind of work that you like, try and identify the kind of work you like. Try and be like, oh, I like to read stories that have speculative elements or stories that have magical realism. I like to read post-colonial literature by women of color. I think that if you can identify the kind of book you like to read, it gives you a way to find more of that material going forward, and that'll be different for everyone. But for me, as you saw on my list, it's a lot of short fiction by women of color, and a lot of these are more speculative.
I get it. Thank you. Kritika, you want to have a short 1 minute quick dig at it. I think we are getting a lot of questions, so I just want to make sure we can do justice to the maximum ones of those here.
Yeah, I think just don't be afraid to have an opinion about what you're reading. Just because you're reading something by an established writer doesn't mean that you are not allowed to dislike it. So the more you read, the more you'll come across stuff that maybe is just not your type. It's not your style. And so don't read more of that and just read the stuff that makes you happy, read the stuff that makes you feel comforted, that feels almost effortless. Yeah. And that's your realm, essentially.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for that. Sanjana, this question is absolutely for you. What's so different about being in an MFA program in terms of the writing craft itself? And do you think that specially contributed to winning or to writing good stories in general?
I think my MFA has done a lot for me over the last 3 years. I don't think it's the only way to be a good writer or the only way to be published or win things at all. But I think I got very, very lucky to have some incredible teachers. And more than that, the MFA is just dedicated time where you can focus on writing, right? When else in your life will you have 2 or 3 years where your job is to write? I think that's the most valuable thing an MFA gives you is time. And then of course you have community with your peers and you have people who are reading your work, and that's a magical thing. That can be a positive and a negative. You're never going to find everyone helpful. I think you find specific readers who know what you're going for and who understand what you're trying to do and then are able to respond to it. So I think I've loved my MFA, and I think it's done really, really good things in helping me develop my voice and helping me feel confident about writing and helping me know how I want to move forward with the story. I think my biggest piece of advice with an MFA is do not do it if it's not fully funded. It's not worth it if it's not fully funded. It's not worth spending a lot of money for, and it's not worth going into debt for. If you get into a fully funded MFA, incredible. Absolutely do it. If it's not fully funded, do not.
Thank you. I think that's an insider's perspective on that. And there's so many good questions, and I'm sure I will have to leave some out. So I'm going to restrict both of you to 1 minute each and give you one question each. Kritika, how can we as writers understand more about human conditions? 3 tips, please.
By being honest, and in your everyday life, you'll actually have to change completely as a person if you're going to be a good writer. By spending time with people who are not afraid of being their true authentic selves, and by being comfortable with anything that's with your own discomfort. As somebody said, I don't know who, but art is supposed to comfort the disturb the comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable.
Disturb the comfort and comfort the sorry, I got it wrong. But
comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. So people who are like not sufficiently disturbed should be rattled and unsettled by good art. But people who are already sort of disturbed, they should find solace in good art. So you should be that person too in the world, I think, who does that to people.
Indeed. Moving on, Sanjana, how do you name your characters?
Oh, a great question. I don't know if I have a great answer. I think I just have names that I like, and I sort of try them out in stories. And whichever one feels most right for the character, I go with that one. Often the names will change. Often the name that I started writing with will not be the name that comes out at the end. Sometimes the names have more significance. I have a story that draws on Hindu mythology, and so the names of my characters in that one, the meanings of those names allude to that specific myth. So occasionally the names will have like a resonance. They'll have some connection to mythology or some connection to language. Sometimes it's just the name that I like.
Interesting. Last question, and I don't know whether I get it completely. Gardener or architect? What is your approach? Kritika, you want to go first, and I'll let Sanjana also have a dig at it. Yeah.
I had that question. I don't know what it means.
I also don't know what it means.
So I am sorry then. Hard luck, but we'll do pass that question.
Okay, I do know what it means, if I may.
Please go ahead. Please go
Yeah,
ahead, Jessica.
all right. So the Gardner technique is basically you figuring out the story as you go, and the architect is you already have the entire plot in place, you everything decided, and all you have to do is write it. So this question is for all three of you. Which approach do you take respectively when you're writing?
Well, for me, it's going to be an architect who doesn't know that she's a gardener.
Okay. Please. I'm intrigued. What do you mean by that?
Make a structure and then it just falls apart. But I have to make a structure because I'm just a control freak. And then it just keeps falling apart and I have to make sure I keep my shit together through the whole process. That's it.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah, I think similar. I think I'm definitely more of a gardener. I will sometimes try to outline stories and it does always fall apart. I think a big part of writing is a process of discovery. So as you're writing, you're kind of discovering where the story wants to go. And I'm a fan of just letting the story do what it wants to do rather than enforcing a rigid idea upon it.
Right. And my approach is a mix of the two. When I'm writing a short story, it's definitely a gardener. You want to imagine and things. And what I would realize from when I'm writing is that how one story leads to the other. So I would have written one perspective, and then I would write the second one, and then the third one, and then I would realize, hang on, there's enough material already that I've thought enough about to actually convert it into a longer form. So that then leads to a novel. So that is what I'm in the process of converting a couple of short stories into a novel. But I think we are on the top of the hour. So thank you, Kritika. Thank you, Sanjana. I have really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm sure our audience has as well. So the recording will be up there for those of you who have been asking about it. But
Yes.
thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Vidhan, I think you're frozen. Yeah, is it
Cheers.
just
Have a
me?
good day.
Thank you,
Thank you
Vidhan.
so much.
All right.
Love